Welcome to the Literacy Geeks Show. We are your hosts, Jonathan Lemaster.
And Lee Ramsey.
The goal of our Literacy Geeks Show is to inspire educators and spark great conversations that help students meet and exceed reading and writing standards.
Join us as we geek out about our journey to revolutionize literacy instruction. Today, we are geeking out about how the explicit teaching of deep reading strategies can help students successfully respond to text-dependent writing tasks. That's a mouthful.
Yeah, it is a mouth, yeah.
This is our third show about text-dependent tasks and analysis. And as we brainstorm, we keep thinking that there might be one or two more to go. But we wanted to start off talking about the most fun thing in the world, standards. I think maybe we should have a dance like we do for techie time,
yeah.
right? I mean, yeah, it's standard time. We should be pumped. And I think, the more Jonathan and I talk about and think about the skill and the standard, and I just think it's so important for us to get all on the same page, from in the administration to the principal to the teacher implementing this in the classroom. We need to be really on the same page, and I think the standard is could be the glue. I mean, yeah, what do you think, Jonathan?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. Last show, we identified 6 standards that were connected to text-dependent writing. And when we switched our lens to reading and said, okay, well, what are the prerequisites to actually writing about a text? Well, you have to dig into the text, right? You have to be able to understand it and do something with it once you've read it. And in our analysis of the standards, we found 3 of the 9 reading standards that are dedicated to using sources. Isn't that amazing? So it's almost a third of all standards, and then a third of just the reading standards. It's impressive. So R1, we're back to R1 again. The reading 1 is citing textual evidence. R2 is about determining central ideas, right? Mm-hmm. You got to dig into the text in order to understand what this text is about. What is the author saying? And then R8 is about tracing an author's argument over their text. And so you have 3 different standards that are talking about dig deeper, dig deeper, dig deeper. And that's really the whole goal. I think deep reading is the goal that we have for our kids when we assign a reading. We want them to understand it at a deep level.
Where does deep reading come from? I was always a little confused. It was like reading comprehensions, but then there's deep reading comprehension.
It's interesting, the term deep reading is also sometimes synonymous with close reading. And I think there's a difference between active reading. So there's active reading that you just imagine a kid that's interested in the reading. And then you have, and maybe doing something with the text, right? Maybe using a highlighter or something. Then you have deep or close reading. And what that refers to is a student's ability to go beyond what the simple comprehension of the text is. Oh, this is about volcanoes, or oh, this is about school uniforms. It requires students to go past that and then start looking at how is the text structured, what kinds of arguments are being made here, what is the author up to, who is this author. I was just in a class the other day observing a teacher, and students were I think they were stuck with some questions that the teacher was asking. And it wasn't that they didn't understand the text. They understood it. They didn't have a deep understanding of the text through the author. Had they known some things about the author before those questions were asked, they could have answered them. But she was asking them to have some information that they just did not have at that moment. And deep reading and close reading requires students to just, as it suggests, to go beyond. So there's also another term, surface comprehension, this idea that I understand what it says, but then what is the author doing? And I think it's a great question, a great distinction.
In the last episode, I know we were talking about it, and it really dawned on me from our conversation how important understanding the author is to this work. And even in building out some of our application, I left author up, and you're like, no, it needs to have author. And, it really wasn't until, we've been here 14 years, and I know we each kind of do our own part, but it was really an understanding of, oh, you really need to understand what the author what they stand for, what they do, and then what are they trying to do here in this text, right?
Yeah, and in the show, I said that I didn't really feel comfortable assigning texts that didn't have an author,
Mm,
because
mhm,
when you cite something, when you incorporate someone else's ideas, it's really best practice to put a name to it.
mm, mhm.
And if it doesn't have a name, that's just basic, right? If you can't name where this comes from, that's really challenging. That's
Yeah.
really difficult. So
I
I
think
want my kids to have that name, because then someone who's reading my writing, where
mhm,
I've referenced something that someone said, they can go look at that someone and they
mhm,
can say, okay, who is this person? Why is this person, what's this person's position? Why did me, Jonathan, the writer, include this person, right? It's just so interesting. There's a lot of facets to deep reading or close reading. To your
mhm,
question, there's a lot of different conversation, but the I think the biggest thing, the takeaway for our conversation today, is helping kids get past the surface comprehension and looking deeper at what's going on in the text. And if
mhm.
you know more about the text, you can speak about it in sophisticated ways. If
Right.
you don't know enough about the text, or you don't know how the text is built or what the writer is up to, it's really difficult to write anything profound or significant about what the writer is doing. So
Mhm.
that's the difference, really.
Okay.
And what's interesting about this conversation is, how does one develop the skill of deep reading comprehension? What do we do? And I have to tell you that I didn't really have a lot of strategy in college, and it was a hardship for me. And when I was in my master's program, and I think there's some stories coming up that we're going to be able to share, and I really think we'll connect with our listeners. We're going to connect to their experiences. But I discovered while I was at San Diego State University getting my master's degree in rhetoric and writing, my professors read differently than I ever read, and differently than I had seen other people read. And I kind of, not in a weird way, but I looked over their shoulder from time to time, when our master's classes were very small, like 7, 8
Mhm,
kids,
mhm,
students. And so it was very, intimate settings. We were always gathered around a table reading. And I would look over their shoulder or over their forearm, and I'd see their pencil doing very specific things. And I would ask, "What are you doing?" Like, I understood what active reading was. I feel this, I want to do that. But they were very intentional about what they were marking.
mhm,
And they told me that they were categorizing information with symbols.
mhm,
They were categorizing information with symbols and tracing what writers were doing with arrows and other symbols. And I thought, this is fascinating. So that's consistent. You would do this with everything you read? It's like, yes, absolutely.
mhm,
So long story short, over time, I adopted that process and called it marking a text. And that became kind of a central piece to my critical reading book that I wrote, and then also became a central piece for Literacy TA, one of our cross content deep reading strategy platforms for all content areas that
mhm.
schools can go to and teach kids how to read deeply across all content areas.
It seems like there's another set of questions that the reader should be asking,
Hmm.
and this strategy helps kind of make sure that they're top of the list, and they're important for them to answer as they go through the text, right?
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, it's important to note that for the purposes of this show, there's so many different deep reading strategies that a teacher can employ, and students can master. For our show today, we're going to be focusing on marking a text, because it's something you pick up right away. It's something that works effectively. It's going to engage kids in authentic conversations. And all you need is a piece of paper and a pencil, and you're off and running. So it's really simple. The application is easy to pick up, and you can start it. In fact, another teaching story, real quickly, a teacher learned about it while I was training, and she implemented the very next. It was a in school training, and she implemented it the very next period and had great success. I went and observed her, and I was blown away by how well it adapted and how she was able just roll it out, and the kids loved it and had great conversations. So it's very practical.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
And we think this skill, when implemented in the classroom, really helps address the skill gap or the opportunity gap that happens, and we know that this happens traditionally around third grade when the student is transitioning from
Yeah.
learning to read to understanding what they're reading about, and
Yes.
it's such a big transition, and the focus traditionally has been on content. Well, they know how to read well, right? And now we got to teach them, the 50 states in the U.S. We're starting to go into facts and understanding things, and I think that was a big shift with college career readiness. It's back to skills and the importance of teaching skills, and what we've seen from the research reports and understanding what's happening in the classroom is the support for learning how to read and deep reading comprehension strategies really don't exist, or very little. And
Yeah.
every grade level, they become less and less, and it really just focused on the content. And when Jonathan and I reflect back on our what happened, I know when I was in the classroom or when I was going through high school, it was really just memorizing facts, and the multiple choice tests were make sure you read it and you remembered some of those facts to get a good grade. And I think, back to this transition, I feel like we're still in this transition,
Yeah.
which is weird. It feels weird. I feel like we've been talking about this for 14 years since we
Yes.
started this company. I mean, do you think we're making progress on this transition from content to skill, or is it?
When I got into education, people said change is slow. And maybe that's a universal fact that change is slow.
Yeah,
But we're talking about, and I've heard education talked about as museum, or it's like a barge trying to turn a barge.
right,
It's the
right.
change is slow, but it doesn't necessarily need to be slow, if
Mm,
that makes sense.
yeah,
What we do know is that last year in the National Assessment of Educational Progress, the NAEP report came out, and I was actually quite surprised, because we have put a lot of money, schools and districts have put a lot of money into supporting their students, supporting their reading. And the report came back stating that scores have kind of plateaued, they're stagnant. In eighth grade, they've dropped. So we see a decline in our eighth graders, not progressing forward. In
mm,
most grade levels, you mentioned third grade, that shift from 3 to 12, there is almost zero growth
mm,
in reading. And that is shocking and troubling. And we
mm,
need to be really, really aware of that, and attuned to that, because that should really be a guiding light. Of course, it's one report, and of course it's coming from National Reading Assessment, but it's something that we should really, really be aware of, because it's telling us that what we're doing might not be working, and so we need to change what we're doing. And you hinted to it just a minute ago. It's like the assigning of things, or gaining content, of course, is important. But what if we just tweaked it a little bit and said, you're still going to get the content, but
mm,
you're going to read for it, and not just read it to answer questions, but read it to understand it and dig into it a little bit, so that you get that content, but you also get those reading strategies as well. Because I think that's the tweak that
mm,
needs to be made, of assigning versus assigning with purpose.
mm.
Jeff Swires, in his book about academic conversations, talks about this idea of pseudo communication. He argues in his book that, and see how I'm doing my text, see my text evidence, I'm
I know,
being
I
full.
love it. Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah.
He argues in his book that students are engaged in unmeaningful exchanges with language, where they're not using language effectively, and they're not engaging authentically. And when reading that argument about pseudo communication, where teachers are assigning communication, but they're just what Zwires calls playing the game of school. They're
Mm,
just checking a box because that's what they think will get them the A in class.
mm,
That's not what teachers intend. That's when we assign a conversation to our kids, some collaborative work, we intend for them to embrace it. We intend for them to really engage in the conversation the way we imagined it when we wrote the lesson. And I think the same thing is true with reading. There's this idea of like pseudo reading.
Mm,
We're assigning reading, and you could ask any teacher. It's like, yes, we read, yes, we read, yes, we read. And it's like, okay, how are you reading? How are
mm,
you reading that text? And perhaps it's that tweak of purpose driven reading that can really make a difference, where they are diving into a text with certain questions that they're asking. They're
mm.
using a certain analytical lens, like marking a text, if you will, to break the text down. And that might gain us a little bit of traction going forward, because now students are beyond, they're engaged in work that's beyond just completing a task or finding an answer.
Yeah. I think the brain wants to do the easiest thing.
Yeah,
So if whatever's the easiest, right? So if we can quickly and easily, is it faster to like, take the multiple choice and come up with the, get rid of the two that probably aren't a match, you 50-50, and then you kind of read through the text. Yeah, and you can almost do that a little quicker than really understanding what the text is about, or what the author's trying to do, right? It's
right.
so much. The brain wants to do the easy thing, and I think that's the challenge, right? You have
Yes.
kids in the classroom and their brain wants to do the easy thing. Them out of that, right? Like how do you trick them, I guess, is kind of the words I've heard you say, and in
Oh
a way,
yeah.
right? It's
You got to trick them.
yeah.
You have to trick them. And there's real consequences to this. So we're talking about the CCRs, and we're talking about getting kids to develop prerequisite skills in order to meet the standards. And a prerequisite skill is this close reading or deep reading strategies. What was your experience like in college? What was your experience like when you were in classes that were reading heavy and required you to do something with that reading? What was that like for you coming out of school, having a lot of tasks assigned to you, but maybe not a lot of deliberate practice where you're mastering skills? What was that like for you through college?
Yeah, I completely struggled. I would get D's and F's on most of my papers. I would turn in
Mm,
where I had to read something and talk about it
mm,
authentically and in a smart way.
mhm,
And in looking back, yeah, I didn't have those skills.
mm,
I was in a philosophy class, and the instructor was amazing. Probably one of my favorite classes. He'd come in as a different philosopher each day, and then he would argue what he believed. That philosopher, he's like, you'll never know what I believe, but I'm going to come in each day. I'm going to play the philosopher, which is back to your credibility of understanding who that person is, and then he
yeah,
would
yeah.
he would present his ideas
Mhm,
about it, right? And then we would have to write some argument and use these philosophers.
mhm,
Horrible at it. There was an ethics class I had, and we needed to have a paper written at the end. I failed that, and I wasn't very good. I was decent at reading and understanding it, but not at that deep comprehension level. And these type of questions you talk about, they never really happened in my brain, so I wasn't taught how to be able to talk about what I read
mhm,
in an intelligent way.
mhm,
So it was a challenge, and I mean, it lasted all the way through college. I remember you have to take a writing exit exam here in at San Diego State University, and at the end, I had taken it twice. I had finished all of my classes, and I had failed, I think, for the second time, and I had to extend my semester, one more semester,
mm,
uh, and couldn't graduate at that point just because I hadn't passed it, and we had to, you know, sat down with some tutors, went through, what I was doing, tried to learn the essence of what they were looking for. And it
mhm.
seemed like a 5 paragraph essay, when we talk kind of the
You
essence of what they
know,
were looking for with
yeah.
very kind of specific things. So
Mhm,
I had to kind of learn how to write that. And I was able to get my score up 1 point, I think, and was able to pass. So yeah, that was kind of my struggle. How about you? How was your experience in college?
I was terrified. I mean, I, I loved my high school experience, but going into college, if it wasn't for sheer grit, determination, perseverance, I don't think I would have succeeded.
Mm,
I stumbled my way through lots of classes, dropped ones that were above my head,
mm,
and ironically, I became an English teacher. That was not necessarily my strength, but it was a passion of mine. I really enjoyed the English classroom. I enjoyed the conversations, but I certainly wasn't equipped to read the ways my professors expected me to read.
Mm-hmm.
And from our conversations, things that come up, I think, is I really wasn't taught how to think about a text. I felt
Mm-hmm.
like I could read, right? And I took a multiple choice test, and it's like, look at my score, I can read. But it really never measured how I thought
Mm-hmm.
about the text and how I understood what authors do. And authors make very, very specific decisions all throughout their writing. It just doesn't happen just by chance.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't happen that way. And even textbooks, someone challenged me years and years ago and said, you can't close read a textbook. And I'm like, let's do it. God, maybe I'm wrong. Let's take a look. And we broke it down. And sure enough, even though textbooks are dry, there's specific moves that those writers are making in that textbook that you can analyze and distill. And here is the trick of all tricks. If you teach a student how to look at what an author does in a textbook, the textbook is no longer boring because the brain is active and
Mm-hmm.
looking at how all the information is constructed from compare and contrast to cause and effect. And now the kid's like, I actually like reading my textbook. It's really interesting. What? And it's because you're going beyond just what it's saying and looking at how it's constructed.
Yeah.
And I think that's all of what college is
Mm-hmm.
that analysis, deep analysis of everything that you do. And
Yeah.
it's the same with texts. They
Yeah.
want you to dive in deep. And diving in deep is not being able to say, what is the topic? Like that's not deep enough.
Yeah. That's boring. It's kind of, it hit me. Boring means there's nothing happening on the brain,
Right.
right? But as soon as the brain's lit up, it starts asking questions. It's not bored anymore, right? The
It's not
boredom
boring.
isn't there, right? So
Even if
how
the task is hard, your
totally,
brain is
yeah,
your brain will engage in it if it knows the steps to break something down or to get to the next
yeah,
place, right? It will do it.
yeah.
Yeah,
It's like I wouldn't call college boring, right? Like that
no,
would no, there was nothing about it. It was challenging. It was,
challenging. Yeah,
there wasn't very little that was boring. So
right.
that's interesting.
Yeah, so one of the things that we like to do with the show is we want to give our listeners something right away that they can take back. And that's something that we pride ourselves on. We want to make sure that whatever we're talking about, you get excited about it, that we have some ability to show you what it is, or so you give it to you so you could try it. So that's something we like to do. We're going to go ahead and I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to show you this marking a text system. And while I'm doing this, some of the things we've been talking about will start to become a little bit clearer. And then if you do something like this, see where you can tweak what you're currently doing or adapt something or maybe make a little change here or there to see if it can be, kind of make a difference with what you're currently doing. All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. What you're looking at here is the marking a text system. And there are 3 marks that we recommend, but you can always add more. Just be careful with the brain because if you give the brain too much to do at once, it also will start to shut down. So at the top is numbering paragraphs. We don't consider that a mark necessarily. It's just you want to write those paragraph numbers down. The kids need to learn paragraphing. And when the paragraph numbers are written down, it makes it very easy for kids to talk about information in each paragraph. In paragraph 4, the author does this. In paragraph 6, this is what's happening. In paragraph 1, the author claims that. It's very easy to reference these moments in the text, these moves, these shifts, these decisions when you have a paragraph number. And then we have our 3 marks. We have our circle, we have our bracket, and we have our underline. Now, what's really nice about this is they're very easy to use and they're universal. What that means is you could circle anything you need kids to circle. You can bracket information, you can underline, and that information can change based on the prompt. And that's really important for us at Literacy Geeks, is that you provide a prompt before any reading. So if you have some questions at the end that you want kids to know, synthesize those and make it into a prompt and give it to them before they read. If you're reading a chapter in fiction, give a prompt for that chapter. Yes, for just that chapter, because you want your kids to read that chapter in a very specific way. If you're going to read a section of textbook, is there a review question you can use to move it forward to the front and use that as the prompt? And if you
Mm.
can give them a prompt, then they can create what we call a marking key. The marking key would have these underlines, the brackets, the circles, and then what are they underlining? What are they bracketing? What are they circling?
Can
So they
you
would
put
create
those,
this key.
where do you usually do the key?
The key ends up being at the top of the page. Now, I know in a textbook or a novel that's difficult to do, but I also say that if you're reading something deeply, it's really important to make a copy of it. So if you need to make two copies of 2 pages of a textbook or 2 pages of a novel, it's really important to just do that and have them ready for the students. And then that way they can actually touch the text. Otherwise, if it's an article, you can just make a copy. And I put the key at the top of the article, and I'll show you here.
Oh,
So you can see the key at the top. There's the circle, the underline, and remember I said some of these symbols are flexible. You can add new ones. In this particular case, students are not to bracket anything, but students are to draw arrows to make connections.
mm,
So you have circling key terms, which are in a very simple way, they're words that are essential to the author's either main idea or central claim. They're words or phrases that if you were to tell someone about this person's ideas, you must include these words.
mm,
So, food staples, economic crisis, they're not cool words, they're not fancy words, they're not words you don't know. They're words that you have to have if you were to summarize this person's ideas accurately. What's cool about that is with your arrows, you can draw arrows from those words. Like this is how this word is related. So, in paragraph 4, see how easy that is? Food
mm,
insecurity is related to economic crisis, because when we have economic crises, there's also what follows food insecurity.
mm,
Those two words are very important, or phrases are important to have together. So for this, we want our kids to make connections from words to paragraphs, and I'll show you another page here. In this case, we're drawing arrows from line to line, but a couple of things I want you to see here. One is there's not a ton of circling and there's not a ton of underlining. And
mm,
that might be the case when you first start a strategy like this, but eventually students will be more judicious. They're going to be more careful with
mm,
what they're circling and underlining, and they're going to get to what is really essential and what is not. And this, Lee, is why this strategy is so powerful. I'm going to give it to you right now. Number one, I just said something that is really important. Kids have to make decisions about what is important and what is not. So they automatically are analyzing and evaluating everything.
mhm,
And they have to say, okay, categorize. Is this something I should circle or something I should underline or something I
mhm,
should bracket?
mhm,
Right? So that's really important. The brain is fully engaged because
yeah.
now they're having to make decisions about what they are marking. And the second piece, and this is perhaps the most important, is you have kids talk about their markings. And it sounds like this: turn to a neighbor, turn to your elbow partner, get your A partner, get your B partner. What did you circle and why? La 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 la. In paragraph 2, I circled economic crisis. In paragraph 4, I circled food insecurity.
Mhm,
Why did you circle that? I circled food insecurity because it was mentioned a couple of times. Great. I circled economic crisis because it was mentioned in the first paragraph, along with food staples and food staples. And they're having conversation about text, and all you ask them to do is talk about what they circled.
mm. Yeah, right. It's getting their brain active, and yeah, it's so interesting looking for the key terms, right? And the key terms, and think of how many. I know one of the things we talk about from a deep comprehension standpoint is really you have to read it a few times, multiple
Yes.
times, 10, 20, 30 times. And as you do this, right? So how many times you might have to read this
Yeah.
half a dozen times to be able to do this well, right? I mean, it is not something that is probably going to be very quick unless you're maybe pretty skilled at it. Maybe it starts to come easier and easier.
Yeah, and you to your point about rereading, we always talk about reading from left to right because that's how we read, right? We were going to read from the left side of the page to the right side of
Mhm.
the page, and then from top to bottom.
Yeah.
But with deep reading, you also read from the bottom to the top.
Mm.
What I mean by that is, as you mark things, you go back up and re-look at a paragraph and say,
Yeah.
wait, I thought that idea was talked about. Oh, interest. Oh, so that's what that's talking about. Look at meat-laden diets. This idea of meat-laden diets, you have to pause and say, what is a meat-laden diet? And
Mm.
then in paragraph 4 above it, it says meat intake. Huh.
Mm.
Well, I know that meat's expensive. Uh-oh. Food insecurity.
Mm.
Ah, economic crisis.
Mm.
So this idea that because we have meat-laden diets and that we eat so much meat, food security comes in partly because of what we eat and the cost of that behavior.
Mm.
Isn't that interesting? And you start like connecting these things all because you did the heavy lifting in the beginning and said, what are the words I need to know? What is the argument being made? I'm going to
Mm.
underline that, and then again you could bracket evidence, and it's quite universal, very easy to use. If you don't use a prompt, you can still have a key. You could just give them the key. You can say, here's the key that we're going to be using today. You don't have to have a prompt. But I'll get on my soapbox real quickly about prompts. If we're only assigning prompts when kids write, they're never getting enough practice
Mm.
reading a prompt and breaking it down. Because if
Yeah.
we assign writing 5 times a year, they're practicing prompts 5 times. But if we assign 20 articles a year, then they're practicing reading prompts 20 times a year. And
Yeah.
kids are going to be better practicing 20 times than they are 5. And it's just really important to know.
So how many times a week would you practice a prompt in your classroom?
It's almost every 2 weeks, there's going to be a new prompt and a new article. If you break that down, it's about 18 to 20 experiences in a year, that they're going to have this close reading, deep reading experience. Sometimes you could do it faster, like with poems, it would be every other day.
Mm-hmm.
So there'd be a prompt and a poem every other day, depending on your class, depending on your subject matter. But
Okay.
it really does help the kids, give them a prompt because it gives them. Have you ever read something and then your teacher says, "Oh, and you're gonna do this with it," and it's like, "Great! I didn't even think of that while I was reading."
Yeah. 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 It's just not even part of their thought process. Yeah.
So
It's
you
just,
frustrate them.
and it makes sense. I mean, all of this stems from, text dependent writing. And so one of the hardest parts that they're going to have to do is really understand those prompts. And those prompts, when I've seen them, man, those state tests are hard. And so that's just one of those other skills to practice, right? To make
Right.
sure when they're going through and understanding what they're supposed to do, they actually are like building a list of questions that they need to start asking as they start to read, right? To be able to really understand and get ready to write about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
That's
absolutely. So we've taken this journey together. What are some ways that Literacy Geeks supports the thinking about a text, the marking a text strategy? What are some things that we have done? Because I know this has been a journey for both of us to ensure that students who read with us are being supported. Teachers who use our platforms have the resources and the know-how to deliver great instruction. So, what are some things that we're doing that can really help?
when we started 14 years ago is kind of the center of our main strategy on literacyta.com. And I know you've built multiple scaffolds and supports and lots of different ways to implement marking a text in the classroom. I think we have teacher how-to videos, and every time we would go out and we'd do training, and we'd get feedback, and we kept iterating over and over and over again on this one skill alone. And I know that the teacher toolkit on Literacy TA is a great way. If you're still not sure how to get started, go to literacyta.com. You can get the toolkit. That's one way to get started, or send us an email. We love to help any of the teachers out there as well. I know we then boiled all of that into Quindu, which
Mm-hmm.
is our middle school reading program. And from there, we adapted marking a text as a question. So instead of taking a multiple choice question, we actually wanted them to highlight uh, a sentence. Usually is what it is, and so it's still different. So I think some of our materials and the way we talk about the essence of what you just talked about as a strategy is a little different, but it is we still it helped us significantly because we could make sure there wasn't just four questions to choose from. There's hundreds of sentences that they have to select, and
Mm,
so it really increased the probability that they actually know how to find this information. So
right.
I know those are a few. What are your thoughts on some of the other things we've implemented for helping teachers mark a text?
Well, I think the transferability of it is amazing. So if you're teaching students how to underline something on paper, and then you move over to our online programs, whether it be in elementary, middle, or high, they're used to now going into a text and really making decisions about what am I looking at, what am I going to mark, how much am I going to mark.
Mm,
That's all part of it. It's that practice that's really important. And although there's components to the marking a text strategy that go beyond our question type, it's really cool to expect a kid, as you said, hundreds of sentences, to be able to identify something in a text and say, this is where it happens. And then, of course, if you're using marking a text in the classroom, they're really going to feel confident because that's what you're asking them to do is in this whole text, pinpoint for me. And I think
mm,
it comes all the way down to elementary school strategies where teachers will say, take your index finger and point to the topic sentence in the fourth paragraph. And the kids point to it, and the teacher walks around and the teacher says, don't move your finger, keep your finger on there. And the teacher walks around to see, did they get it, did they not get it? I mean, what a great formative assessment to
mm,
see if they're understanding A, what a topic sentence is, and B, can you locate paragraph 4, and then can you locate the topic sentence in paragraph 4? That's a lot of thinking.
mm.
It's a lot
Yeah,
of thinking going on. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's
it's really
interesting.
cool.
Yeah, yeah, that is.
Yeah. All right, so we're going to switch over to our techie segment. So let's get techie. I kind of have the same move every time.
I know, right? We need to be like
You got into it last time. I don't
move or I don't
this is
move right.
All right, Lee, share some of your thoughts about low tech, high tech. What do we do with this?
Yeah, this one's interesting. This seems like very low tech. When we've chatted about this, I think there's something magical about pen and paper and having the article.
Hmm.
And so that is really the center of this. And I I'm the chief tech geek, and I love pen and paper. I've got graph paper sitting next to me, and one of my favorite things, it really connects the ideas, is when I take that pen and it hits the paper. And
Mm,
so I am with you. I really really understand where you come from on this strategy, and so I really think from a technology standpoint, really this is the most important. And I know it's pencil is what you usually recommend. But it's really the article and the pencil.
hmm
From there,
hmm
it's probably quite similar to last week. The number one thing think from a technology standpoint is that document camera again,
hmm
where you're up there, you're showing it on the big screen, and you're starting to you know think and talk, and you see where the pencil's going and your thought process about it, and then maybe the key term you would circle. I So important. I think that's probably one of the best ways to harness technology in the classroom.
Yeah.
um, and I know you've even you've talked about implementing this using Google Docs, and I think that works too. You're still very similar. I do think getting thoughts onto paper. I still think pen and paper is the best, but um, you can do that through technology as well. So sharing the article with your students, making sure that they get their own copy
Mm-hmm.
and then they can go, do these similar marks.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them are a little more difficult. You kind of have to change how you do it. Use a color code, or the symbols, a little bit different, but at the end of the day, it's the same thing. You're highlighting some few words, right, or sentence,
Mm-hmm.
and connecting ideas is probably a little more difficult, right? But it definitely can be done. Yeah. Did you have a guide on that? I think we had a guide on that on Literacy TA, right? That kind of showed how to do that electronically.
Yeah, we'll go ahead and we'll put a couple of different resources in our
Yeah.
Geek Gazette that you guys can look at and just keep learning, which is amazing. There's two thoughts. We talk about document camera. The last show we talked about document camera too. Sometimes you go into these classrooms and the document camera is ancient. So I just
Mm,
wanted to take just a quick moment to talk about strategy. How do you get a new document camera? Because
mhm,
some of us don't want to even go there because it's like my document camera is terrible. It zooms and
mm,
focuses and then gets out of focus all the time, or it's all dark and kids don't like it and they don't see it, and or it projects a teeny little square.
mm,
If you want new equipment in education, you've got to hustle. You got to figure it out. There's a couple of things you could do. You can do a donation. You could ask families for donation and really explain how their kids are going to benefit from
mm,
having this learning tool. You go to your principal and ask. You can make a justification for your coordinator and say that my students need modeling. I need to be able to walk them through a text, and I
mm,
need the best equipment possible. Document cameras, when I started teaching, were nearly, I want to say $2,000 for
mm,
one. Now they're about $150,
mm,
and you can get them even cheaper than that. And the quality is really great. So not that I recommend it because we love our teachers. We care so much. We don't want you to go spend your own money, but you can always go buy one. Don't let the bad tech in your room keep you from great teaching. I
mm.
guess that's the
I
the,
love that.
the moral.
Yeah. Keep
You've
fighting.
got to fight to get
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. What about donors choose, or some of those? Have you seen teachers have success there?
Absolutely. Yeah. Donors Choose is a great place. My wife, who's an elementary school teacher, completely outfitted her whole classroom with Donors Choose.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
was over a couple of years, and they run some really great specials. They do pricing match specials where
Mm,
different sponsors like HP will say, any money you bring in, we'll pay exactly the same amount. And so if you raise 200, you just have 400. So there's lots of incentives for Donors Choose. It's a great opportunity for you guys to find those funds to buy some of this equipment that you need. And I'll tell you, a document camera is essential when we're talking about teaching kids how to attack a text and engage in deep reading comprehension.
yeah. That's awesome.
All right, so later this week, we're going to go ahead and post a couple of great resources on Geek Gazette. So please follow up and look for those opportunities. And next week, we're going to dive into how to select high interest text. Because as we were talking about this before the show, we were like, oh, yeah, we've got to go back another step now. We just keep taking one step back and saying, the
Yeah.
text that we're bringing in, that's really important because not all texts lend themselves well to deep reading strategies or deep reading practice. So it's important to know what the text has to offer, and is it a viable text to use in order to teach a certain strategy. So I'm excited about that conversation. Thanks for geeking out with us.
You're the geekiest.
Oh, Lee, you're the geekiest. Come on.
No, 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 no. You are way more geekier than I am.
You know, that's just not true. You are the geek master.